Hello everyone, FPL Raptor here, and welcome back to another video on my YouTube channel. In today's video, we have my Game Week 8 preview, where I'll be discussing some of the key players that you should be looking to buy and sell in your FPL teams. If you do enjoy today's video, please do smash that like button, and if you're new around here, make sure to subscribe as well. But without further ado, let's jump into it. FPL and YouTube content is back. I hope you've had a wonderful international break, and I hope you're excited for the content to be back. And if you are, please do smash that like button. And if you are new around here, or maybe you've just watched a few videos but you're not yet subscribed, please do consider subscribing. It massively supports me, and I really do appreciate the support as well. So I had a little bit of a think about what do I want to discuss in today's video, because whilst I do want to address your individual questions, I actually thought, you know what, post-international break, people are getting back into the flow of FPL. We've now got 7 game weeks worth of data, which is starting to get to a point where that becomes useful. I thought it might actually be interesting to look at sort of team level data. So in these first 2 sections, I'll try not to make it too dull and boring, but I'm going to look at the team data from a defensive perspective and an offensive perspective, just to look at which teams we should be targeting, not only for players that we own, but then also from a fixtures perspective, like which teams aren't attacking well and are therefore good for our defenders, and which teams aren't defending well and are therefore good for our attackers, for example. So we'll go through each of these and just look at, are there any standout teams, and also players that you therefore might want to target from these teams. So for this first section, we're going to look at team data from a defensive perspective. And in this table, I've just basically got their rankings according to non-penalty expected goals conceded. So that is how the table is organised from 1 to 20. So Liverpool are the best defence in the league so far this season, based on non-penalty expected goals conceded, and Ipswich are the worst. You've then got the big chances conceded. That's what BCC is. So, for example, Fulham are the best defence in the league for big chances conceded with 9, which we'll discuss in a bit. You've got shots in the box conceded, goals conceded, and then their fixture difficulty rating from Game Week 8 to Game Week 14, according to Fantasy Football Hub. If you want to get access to all of the data that I use in my videos, and you want to do your own analysis as well, or you want to get your team rated, or you want to compare players, or you want to get expert team reveals, there is so much over at Fantasy Football Hub. There'll be a link down below to get 30% off. So the team that have been the best defence in the league this season, probably no surprise really if you've owned their defenders, is Liverpool. And they've not just been the best defence, they've been kind of very much the best defence. So non-penalty expected goals conceded, 4.9. Obviously in second is Villa, which we'll discuss in a second, at 6.3. So Liverpool are absolutely the best defence in the league this season. They have conceded 12 big chances, which is not a massive amount. Shots in the box conceded, they have conceded the fewest in the Premier League with 37. And they have comfortably conceded the fewest goals with 2. You can see that they should have, according to expected data, conceded 4.9. There have been some absolutely brilliant saves from Alisson, which we know of him quite well. So maybe a little bit lucky to keep the amount of clean sheets they have, but definitely defended well. So I absolutely want to give credit to Liverpool where it's due. Really good. However, if I switch over now to the official side, I'm going to switch back and forth to discuss a few things. Their fixtures have been incredibly kind. So apart from Nottingham Forest, who I believe are in 10th, they have not faced a single top 10 side. So let's say they've not faced a single team inside the top 9 currently. That is not to say that you wouldn't expect some of these teams to score regardless, but they've not really come up against a strong opposition. And even Slot himself has said this, that Liverpool haven't really come up against a side that have tested them in the Premier League thus far. And I know that is absolutely roasting Man United, but like, if you look at all of these fixtures, you say that clean sheets are definitely there. Now, we've seen with Arsenal recently, Arsenal didn't keep a clean sheet against Leicester or Southampton at home. So just because Liverpool have had good fixtures doesn't mean that we necessarily expect their data to be as strong as it has been. So again, the credit absolutely has to be there, but they've just not played those top sides. And now when you look forward, they're going up against Chelsea, Arsenal, Brighton, Villa, all teams that you would expect to be slightly better from an attacking perspective, then City in 13, and even to some extent Newcastle in 14. I don't think there will be anywhere near as many clean sheets, and I expect their data to drop off slightly. I would not be surprised if we go into, let's say, game week 14, 15, and Liverpool are down in 3rd or 4th for non-penalty expected goals conceded. That wouldn't surprise me, because fixtures are very important for defenders and for clean sheets. So I just wanted to say Liverpool have been brilliant, but do take into account context. And with some of these teams, like Wolves, we'll discuss in a bit, have had absolutely horrific fixtures. So whilst we've got 7 game weeks worth of data, we do also need to take into account the fixtures that they've had across those opening 7. Now on Trent, This does show that with Trent, you've got the most attacking defender in the league, with just ridiculous delivery and ability on the ball, pretty nailed on, playing for so far the best defence in the league. So for those of you that wanted to keep Trent, there is so much justification to do so. But as I said on the flip side, the output hasn't necessarily been there with Trent as much, and the fixtures have been very good. So I don't want to discuss Liverpool for too much longer, but I do want to give them their credit because they've been very good. And if they can keep this up with the difficult fixtures, if going into Game Week 14, Liverpool are still the best defence in the league for data, I would say, do you know what? I hold my hands up. Liverpool might be the new team like Arsenal were last year, where you just want one or two Liverpool defenders at all points, regardless of fixtures. The team that have surprised me most on this entire list was Aston Villa in second. And this is where eye test and data sometimes don't really coincide very well. And it's up to you which one you want to trust. If you use your eye test, I don't think Villa look particularly good defensively. And in fact, they've very, very much struggled for clean sheets. However, the data is suggesting that they're not really giving up that many chances. Only 13 big chances conceded, 6.3 non-penalty expected goals conceded, some of the fewest shots in the box conceded as well. Now, Villa themselves have also had some pretty good fixtures over the opening 7. Maybe not quite as good as Liverpool, but still pretty good. But this just goes to show that if you've had someone like Ezri Konsa and you've not had those clean sheets, you can probably count yourself quite unlucky. And if you are looking for defenders in the long term that might keep some clean sheets, this would suggest that they might be coming for Villa. However, the fixtures aren't really there for them coming up as per Liverpool. So now's probably not necessarily the time that I would go out and invest in Aston Villa's defence. You've then got Chelsea and Man City, and I would group them together because there is a narrative around Chelsea and Man City that they just seem to always concede. And I don't even know if it is a narrative. City and Chelsea do just really struggle for the clean sheets, despite the defensive data here being quite good. And Chelsea really are the standout for me here because there is a narrative going around that you don't really want to invest in Chelsea defence, you want to invest in the Chelsea attack. And we'll discuss in a second, the Chelsea attack have been very good. But defensively, they've also been very strong. Someone like Augusto, if he continues to start, could be really good. Colwill might still be one of the better cheap defenders. And on Man City, having a Rico Lewis or a Gvardiol, as much as it's been frustrating, again, with the lack of clean sheets, or if you've got an Ederson, you would imagine that they do come at some point soon. And Man City are the only team inside that top 6 there, according to Fantasy Football Hub, that from a defensive perspective, because they can order the fixture rating based on defensive and offensive, from a defensive perspective, they're inside the top 10 for fixture difficulty from game weeks 8 to 14. So Man City is still a defence and Rico Lewis is still a player that I would definitely be happy owning. Forest are in 5th, and we've spoken about Forest a lot about how good they are defensively, and this kind of backs it here. They concede very few big chances, they don't concede many shots, and they will be very good for clean sheets. And you can see they have conceded 6 goals in the league, which is the second best joint with Arsenal. Only Liverpool can beat them. So I still think, and given that their fixtures aren't that awful coming up, right? Let's actually have a quick look here. Chris Wood. So their fixtures are Crystal Palace, Leicester, West Ham, Newcastle. Then they play Arsenal, then it's Ipswich. After that, it does start to get a bit more difficult. They've got City, United, Villa. So if it's more of a short-term pick, I still don't mind the Forest defence, but longer term, the fixtures start to turn from sort of game week 12, 13 onwards. So it really depends on sort of your outlook and where you're looking. Around game week 12, I would imagine that with that fixture swing, which we'll discuss a bit later, lots of people will be looking to jump off of Forest players. So it's either now or never, I would probably say. In 6th is Arsenal. They're a team that will demand a lot of attention because last season they were so good defensively. And this year they've not been awful. And you do have to remember that they played 2 games with 10 men for a large part of those games. And apart from the recent 2 fixtures against Leicester and Southampton, they've not had the best set of opening fixtures, especially across those first 5. But still, they're conceding a lot of shots and they just don't look quite as solid defensively. I did explain that even if you take away the 2 games in which they had 10 men, which you shouldn't do, by the way, because that is the way that it happened, they still aren't the best defence in the league this season. There is still something that isn't quite right. And the fact that I've always pointed to that Raya is making so many saves, that is suggestive of a team that aren't quite as solid defensively, because last year Raya was averaging less than 2 saves per 90. This year he's averaging over 3, and that's not normal for Arsenal and for David Raya. So I would expect this to either change or we have to change our perceptions on Arsenal. But right now, Arsenal are as good as Spurs defensively. Now, Spurs have had differing opening fixtures. I would argue not much easier than Arsenal's, though. And Spurs are a team which I have been extremely impressed with. Spurs and Chelsea are 2 teams that due to their recent history, a lot of people just have poor narratives around them and they suggest that they're really weak defensively and that they can't win games. I've been really impressed with Spurs. I know the Brighton game was a massive step backwards because it reinforces this narrative that they bottle games and they're Spursy. You see so many people talk about it. But generally, I have been very impressed with Spurs. They've conceded very few goals. They're not conceding that many shots, and they're still attacking fairly well. Someone like a Pedro Porro, a Van de Ven, they could still be decent options. It's just about whether you do see clean sheets. Not just about will they concede many shots and goals, but do you see clean sheets for Spurs in the future? They've actually got pretty decent fixtures all the way up until about Game Week 20, Game Week 22 Spurs. So it's definitely a team that you could absolutely consider. I love this Fulham data. Fulham have 8 non-penalty expected goals conceded, and they have conceded 8 goals. So they are perfectly in line with their expected data. And as I said with Fulham, they've actually only conceded 9 big chances, which is comfortably the best in the league. Fewer than Liverpool, Forest, Chelsea, City. So Fulham are actually a very good defence. And I look at someone like a Robinson, and I'm like, should I have not sold Robinson on my wildcard? Is someone like Leno one of the better goalkeepers that we could pick at the moment? And you can see that they have the second best fixtures in the league according to Fantasy Football Hub from a defensive perspective from Game Weeks 8 to 14. So I'm seriously looking at Fulham defenders right now and wondering if they might be worth going for. Even like someone like an Anderson is only 4.4 million. So definitely consider them. And also, Bournemouth and Brighton are 2 other defences that aren't defending that poorly. And the thing is, Bournemouth have got this narrative of Bournemouth are a really solid defence. You don't necessarily want to target them. Brighton have got very similar underlying data across the opening set of fixtures. So I don't necessarily think that Brighton are awful defensively and Bournemouth are really fantastic. I think they're both, as this suggests, kind of middling defences that you don't look at those fixtures and necessarily desperately want to target them, but you also certainly don't mind playing your attackers against either Bournemouth or Brighton. Someone will point to, and rightly so, that it's probably different for home and away. Some of these teams are much better at home, some of them are much better away. But then we're starting to get into small sample sizes again because some of them have only played like 3 home games. Sorry, I think they've all played 4 home and 4 away now, if I'm correct. But only 4 games is a very small sample size at that point. No, that's not right, can it be? They've played 7 games. Some of them have played 4, some of them have played 3. So what I'm trying to say is it's a very small sample size to split into home and away. You can tell it's been a while since I've recorded a video. So that's sort of the top 10. Then you can see, if you look at that first column, non-penalty expected goals between Brighton and Newcastle, there's a bit of a jump. So the top 10 is very much separated as the top 10. Then you get into this set of teams around Newcastle, Palace, United, Everton. There's a bit of a drop-off, but they're still not really bad defensively. Like, they're not conceding that many chances. Definitely a bit of a step up from that top 10. But I don't look at that data for Newcastle, Palace, United, Everton and say these are teams that you desperately want to target. They've played 7 games and they're conceding around 10 to 11 expected goals. So, yeah, these are also teams that you're happy playing your attackers against, Newcastle, Palace, United and Everton. But I wouldn't necessarily be targeting these fixtures. Like, people have been saying Palace have been awful. And considering their fixtures haven't been bad, yes, they've not been particularly good. But also 12th for non-penalty expected goals conceded doesn't worry me too much. In terms of Manchester United keeping a lot of clean sheets, I've seen people say, like, would you look at Dalot? Would you look at Onana? Dalot has some attacking threat, and Onana makes a lot of saves, so I don't necessarily mind it. You can see here, United have conceded 63 shots in the box. It's a decent amount. I wouldn't probably be looking at Onana or Dalot, but if I was going to be, it probably would be Onana that I would be going for. And the other team that people are slightly interested in, given their fixtures, given they have the best fixtures according to Fantasy Football Hub from Game Week 8 to 14, is someone like a Mykolenko when he's fit, a Tarkowski who's only 4.8 million now, decent attacking data. I certainly don't mind it. I did discuss on a wildcard in 6 that someone like Jordan Pickford would certainly interest me. So if you have a slot for an Everton defender, no, they've not defended overly well this season. But I think with Branthwaite coming back when he's fit and available, along with Mykolenko when he's fit and available, as long as they can keep that defence fit, I do think that clean sheets will be on the horizon very soon given their fixtures. So yeah, you could look at a Dalot, Onana, you could look at a Pickford or a Tarkowski. They don't necessarily massively inspire me. And then you've got sort of West Ham in between sort of Everton and Wolves. They've been bad defensively, but not awful. They're certainly a team that you're starting to get, when you look at this data, of teams that I wouldn't mind targeting as much. But then we kind of split into Wolves and Brentford, as they're getting over 12 expected goals conceded, non-penalty in 7 games. they're starting to get to teams that they're not defending very well now. And it's funny because I actually have a Wolves and Brentford defender on my wild card. And it really depends on which way you want to go now with this stuff, because you can either say, listen, they are not particularly good defensively, but they've got more attacking defenders, and I just want to target attacking defenders at the moment. Or you can look at this and say, I'm not picking defenders from Wolves, Brentford, Leicester, Southampton, and Ipswich because they are defending so poorly. But Brentford are certainly a team that have lots of defenders from FPL that you consider. Vandenberg, Pinnock, Collins. Once Henry's back, he will be particularly interesting. And the fixtures aren't bad coming up. And even with Wolves, they've got various defenders you could look at, but notably Ryan Ait-Nouri, who is just so attacking, regardless of the position he plays, looks relatively nailed on at the moment. So I still think that Brentford and Wolves defenders are worth investing in, but you have to accept that they've not been particularly good defensively. That being said, they are another team, if we just skip over to the official site. I know this is a very long, rambly section, but they are teams that have had pretty difficult opening fixtures. Wolves have played Arsenal, Chelsea, Forest, Newcastle, Villa, Liverpool, Brentford. And then Brentford have played Ipswich was okay, Southampton was good, but outside of that, it's Liverpool, City, Spurs, West Ham, Wolves. The fixtures haven't been quite as bad for Brentford, so I don't think they have as much of an excuse. Wolves definitely have a massive excuse that they are not a nice set of opening fixtures there. So again, there is some context that needs to be applied, but they've not been defending overly well. And then the three promoted teams are the three worst teams in the league, and this is kind of what you do expect, but Ipswich, Southampton, and Leicester are three defences that are the ones to target. They are all conceded, or they have all conceded over 14 non-penalty expected goals in that opening seven, I should say. So these are the ones to target. That being said, Ipswich have had a pretty tricky opening run, as have Leicester. I would say Southampton have probably had the best opening fixtures of the three. And so for me, despite them not being rock bottom, Southampton still look like the defence to target. Interestingly, Leicester have conceded 104 shots in the box. A lot of that was in the Arsenal game. But again, that is just an awful number of shots in the box conceded in the opening 7 games. So there we go. I'll leave it there because that's over 16 minutes just on defensive data. But yeah, Liverpool stand out to me as just being incredibly good, but I want to see how they do over the opening fixtures. Aston Villa, Forest, Fulham have maybe surprised me how good their defensive data has been, especially considering they've got some good cheap assets. And then in terms of teams to target coming up, it's the newly promoted teams. And unless we see an improvement from the likes of West Ham, Wolves, Brentford, we might start to group them in there as well. So moving on to team data from an attacking perspective, all that has changed here is rather than it being conceded, it's going forward. So non-penalty expected goals, big chances for them, shots in the box and goals scored. And then the fixture difficulty rating, people will point out that it's different to the first section. This is because it's now ordered by attacking difficulty, which Fantasy Football Hub can separate. I don't necessarily agree with all of this, by the way, but I at least can use a more objective measure than just what I think is the fixture difficulty rating. So, the best team in the league for attacking data so far this season is Spurs. And I found this very interesting because Spurs haven't had the best set of opening fixtures. And yes, a large amount of this came in one single game against Manchester United. But they are top for non-penalty expected goals. They are almost top for big chances, only beat by Liverpool. And they've had the most shots in the box and scored the third or fourth here most goals. So slightly underperforming their non-penalty expected goals, but just really impressive going forward. And therefore, with 3 home fixtures in the next 4, again, if we just jump over to the official site, really nice fixtures. West Ham at home, Palace away, Villa at home, Ipswich away. Now, we think back to what we just saw from the defensive data. We are looking at I think they were 15th for non-penalty expected goals. Middle of the table, Crystal Palace. Villa's not actually not an easy fixture based on what we've just seen, although it is at home. And then Ipswich is a really good fixture. So 3 of the next 4 are against bottom half teams. West Ham and Ipswich in particular pretty good. After that, the fixtures start to turn a little bit, especially based on the data we've just looked at. These aren't a set of 4 particularly good fixtures. But if we're looking in blocks, the next 4 fixtures for Spurs are really good. And actually, if I just show you what I was talking about in terms of long-term fixtures for Spurs, I actually don't mind them, really, like all the way through here. They've got some tricky fixtures sprinkled in. But longer term, like they've still got in here Bournemouth, Southampton, Forest, Wolves. They are good short-term picks, but also not terrible long-term holds as well. And therefore, I think Spurs are definitely a team to target with the likes of Brennan Johnson. Solanke, I still think, is an absolutely fine pick. People are really worried that he had 0 shots against Brighton. But in the 2 games before that, he had 7 big chances in 2 games. So I still think Solanke's fine. Johnson, Kulusevski, Maddison, even a Pedro Porro, we look defensively with his attacking threat as well. I really do like Spurs assets. And of course, if Son Heung-min is fit for Game Week 8, I think a lot of people will be looking, if they've got a free slot at that premium price, if they want to move off of Bukayo Saka or Mohamed Salah with the slightly more difficult fixtures coming up, Heung-min Son could be a really, really nice option. Interestingly, Arsenal are in second, despite, again, having to play 2 games with 10 men for relatively large spells of those 2 games. They've created a lot of chances. That all comes pretty much from Bukayo Saka. Bukayo Saka has been involved in 15 big chances this season, which leaves only 12 big chances for the rest of his team in terms of the others. So 15 big chance involvements is absolutely ridiculously high. Only Cole Palmer can beat that. So Arsenal are actually attacking fairly well, even in the absence of Ødegaard. They didn't have Declan Rice for one of the games too. So yeah, it's been surprising this season. From an attacking perspective, Arsenal haven't struggled as much, but defensively they have a little bit more. So we'll have to see if that trend continues. But Arsenal still attack. Like, if you've got Havertz, if you've got Saka, I really don't mind keeping him through this tricky period. And we'll discuss Saka in a bit more detail later. Liverpool still attacking fairly well, but not quite. Like in previous seasons, especially under Klopp, obviously, Liverpool have been standout attack. Like, you look at them and you say, they are so good from an attacking perspective. You've got to own an attacker from Liverpool. And considering their fixtures have been really good over the opening 7, I don't look at this now and think, I've got to own a Liverpool attacker. Yes, they are close to being one of the better teams in the league. They're third. But they're not like leagues ahead of the other teams. Again, when you take into account the fixtures, you would expect them to be topping this right now. But they're not. So I do look at this and think, I'd obviously love Trent. I'd love Salah. But do I have to rush out and get a Liverpool attacker? At least at team value or team level, I don't think as much. City are always pretty good for attacking data, but again, only in 4th here. They've scored the most goals in the league, but they've had far fewer big chances than Spurs, Arsenal, Liverpool, and Chelsea, who surround them. And that just basically means that, listen, Haaland gets the big chances and he scores them, and they don't need as many big chances. They create a lot of small chances, but when they create big chances, they are massive ones, and they fall to the right man, which is Erling Haaland. He's had 11 big chances in the league this season. So 11 of the 20 have fallen to Haaland, and he scored 11 goals or 10 goals. So the man knows how to put the ball in the back of the net. So they don't necessarily need to create the same number of high quality chances. I see then Brighton, United, Bournemouth I could bring together because they're very close for non-penalty expected goals. Brighton are always a very good attack. And even under Hertzler now, rather than De Zerbi, they are still a very good attack. So from game week 12 onwards, Brighton's fixtures start to look really good again. If we've got any Brighton players here, if we look at their fixtures from 12 onwards, Bournemouth, Southampton, Fulham, Leicester, Palace, West Ham, Brentford, Villa. This is a really nice run here that you could look to bring in. If João Pedro's fit around, then we could look to bring him in. Or Welbeck. Or we look for a Ruta or a Matoma. Like, whoever is decent at the time, I can see Brighton definitely coming into our thinking. Do you know what? So I'm just going to jump back again. As per Bournemouth as well. Like, if we just type in like a Semenyo, Bournemouth have got really nice fixtures from game week 12. We're going to discuss the Game Week 12 fixture swing a little bit later, but again, another team that I would not mind, even from 11, investing in for this period here. So I would maybe expect their data to still stay fairly good, maybe drop off a little bit in the next few games, but then around Game Week 12, we might look to be bringing in those Brighton and Bournemouth attackers again. And United, with their fixtures coming up, they could be worth investing in. They've not been awful from an attacking perspective. It just depends if Ten Hag stays or not. Because I think if we bring in a new manager, I think everyone will start looking to Manchester United assets, but I just don't know who that's going to be at the moment. Looks like Thomas Tuchel has taken the England job, which I think, obviously, he's not going to take the Man United job then, and then I just don't know who we're looking to bring in to replace Ten Hag. So I think Ten Hag could stay, and as a result, maybe not the best team to invest in when they've just been very inconsistent. Fulham are still doing fairly well, as are Brentford. So the likes of Smith Rowe and Burmo, all of those players, they could still be decent options. Raul Jimenez is a player that I am seriously interested in. Really good data, lots of shots in the box. Over the last 4 weeks, he started all 4 of them. He's got 4 attacking returns, 11 shots in the box. Raul Jimenez, for his price, could be great value. So yeah, if you've got a Smith Rowe, if you've got a Jimenez, if you've got an Mbermo, with the fixtures that they've got coming up, look at what Fantasy Football Hub is saying. 2nd for Fulham, 6th for Brentford. The fixtures are definitely there to target. They're creating a fairly decent number of big chances as well. A team that I was surprised by is Aston Villa. So if you were to explain to me, or ask me to explain to you, how would you describe Aston Villa? I would say Aston Villa are a very, very strong attack, but slightly weak defensively. So far this season, they're 2nd for expected goals conceded and 11th for non-penalty expected goals. So this suggests that actually Villa are more defensively tight than they are good from an attacking perspective. This might change. It absolutely might. But they aren't creating the same number of chances that they were last season. We need to see a big improvement to justify having multiple of their assets from an attacking perspective. This is obviously only team data. Ollie Watkins has still got really good underlying data. Rodgers doesn't have bad underlying data. Duran, when he's on the pitch, looks very good. So they still have good options, but this does worry me slightly. There is then a drop-off after West Ham down to then Newcastle with 7.8. So from Newcastle down, these are all attacks that haven't created a very high number of chances. Forest are interesting with 7.6. Again, a team that are more defensively solid than they are exciting from an attacking perspective. But Chris Wood continues to deliver the points, so that wouldn't worry me as much. One team that I did want to discuss is actually Wolves, because a lot of people are going to start looking at like Strand Larsen, Cunha, with the fixtures that Wolves have coming up from game week kind of 10, 11 onwards. I can imagine that a lot of people look to bring in some of those assets. I already own Cunha. This isn't particularly good viewing. That being said, again, the fixtures haven't been particularly good. If they do not improve from an attacking perspective with the easier fixtures, then of course, by game week 10 or 11, if they're not scoring more goals and they've not moved up this list a little bit, then we can start to look at it and say, even with the fixtures, maybe they're not worth investing in. And then Ipswich, and maybe even Everton, like you've got the likes of Delap, you've got the likes of McNeil, Vardy for Leicester. Like there are players in this bottom section that are cheap and could be good value. And I find it interesting, like if you look at the fixture difficulty rating for the top set of teams, like the top 6, it's only Spurs that are inside that top 10, or maybe along with Man City, from an attacking perspective for fixtures. But then we look at the bottom section. You've got Southampton with good fixtures, Everton with good fixtures, Palace, Ipswich, Leicester. A lot of the teams with good fixtures coming up are towards the bottom. So it's going to be, how do you approach this part of the season where the players that you want to own probably don't have the best set of fixtures, and the players that you're less willing to own have better fixtures? It's the classic sort of form or player quality versus fixtures debate. And it really depends which side you fall on. I will always try to target fixtures, which is why I have Cunha. It's why I have Aït-Nouri. It's why I was looking at Dwight McNeil, because yes, they are playing for worse teams, but I still feel like you've got to target the fixtures in FPL as much as you possibly can. So there we go. A couple of long sections to start the video on defensive and offensive data. I just thought it would be good to just check in and maybe just look if we've got some narratives forming that aren't necessarily true according to data. Obviously, you need to couple this with the eye test, which I'm trying to do a little bit more this season. But yeah, hopefully this was helpful to look at team level. Let's now look at more individual level, a discussion around some of those premium players and who I think who are the best premiums to own for the upcoming game weeks. So we've just taken a look at sort of team level, the teams that are performing well, the teams that aren't performing as well, and sort of where we see that going moving forward. Another topic that I think is worth discussing in a bit of detail is actually the premium options in FPL. And I would say this is dominating discussion even more so than it does in any other season, because it always is important. Owning the best players is the points that you're spending the most money on your team. You captain the expensive players as well. So the premiums are always very important, but I think even more so this year, just given pricing, given how expensive HAALAND is, given that there's then a drop-off to the likes of PALMER, SAKA, Son, Foden, it feels very, very important to try and get those premiums absolutely right. And it feels like that is where a lot of the red and green arrows are coming from at the moment. So on this list, I've only omitted De Bruyne from the premium options just because he's not fully fit at the moment. Even if it was declared that he was available for game week 8, we know with Pep that he's very unlikely to start, given that he doesn't rush players back normally from injury, especially someone like Kevin De Bruyne. So I look at this and I just think, even if he was declared fit, most people probably won't go there. So I've just got Watkins, Foden, Son, Saka, Palmer, Salah, and Haaland. And the issue with the premiums at the moment is actually that they're all performing incredibly well. Other than Foden, who's coming back to full fitness, and even Son has actually got a decent number of points this season, but he struggled with fitness in the last couple. So other than those two, like Watkins, Saka, Palmer, Salah, Haaland, have all performed extremely well and have all provided really good value at different points. So that makes it difficult that there isn't really like a standout premium that is performing well above the rest. They've all had their different spells that they're doing well. And also, there are a lot of expensive players that we want to squeeze in. So how I'm thinking about this at the moment, I think the first thing that you need to think about, before you look at which premiums you want to own and fixtures and things like that, I actually think it's structure. And remember, I wildcarded in game week 7. And the first thing that I thought about with wildcard, before I even looked at which premiums I wanted to own, the first thing was, what structure do I want to be on? How many premiums do I want to own? And in what positions do I want to own those premiums? And I looked at it and I just thought, I think that it's easier to start with HAALAND and then decide, you know what, actually, I don't think I need Haaland in my team for this period. Maybe he starts to, which we've seen, blanks a couple of games in a row. Maybe City struggle a little bit without De Bruyne, without Rodri. And then you can decide to move off of him. So I immediately just thought, given the fixtures as well, like the starting point of having Haaland makes a lot of sense. But then I also looked at it and thought, you've got Salah, Palmer, and Saka, 3 penalty takers, playing 90 minutes, with at different spells good fixtures, but so talismanic for their sides, good data, which we'll look at in a second. They're all so brilliant. Then you've also got Son, who at periods will be really nice. We think he's still on penalties himself, plays good minutes when he plays, such a good finisher. And then you've got Foden, who'll come back into our thinking, along with maybe De Bruyne. I just looked at it there and I thought, you've got 5 or 6 exceptionally good midfielders. I think the structure that we'll want to move to soon is a 2 premium midfield with Haaland. So I looked at, even before I knew which of Salah, Palmer, Saka, Son, Foden I wanted to own, I looked at it and just thought a 2 premium with Haaland, 2 premium midfield with Haaland is the best structure. So I've committed in my team for the time being to a 3 premium structure. You don't have to do that though. You could go Haaland and Salah and then not own any of Palmer, Saka, Son, Foden, Watkins. Or you could go for more of like a 2.5, have Watkins as a sort of premium and then go for like Haaland and Palmer. I think the structure is really important though. And I just think if you look at sort of game week 12 onwards, lots of people are going to want to own at least 2 from Salah, Palmer, Saka. So I think it's worth starting to think about how can you move your team towards a 2 premium midfield at least structure. 1 premium midfield, it felt like the structure and the template for the opening 6 weeks. I feel like we're starting to transition out of that right now. The other thing you then need to think about is kind of what philosophy do you, and I don't want to overemphasize what we do as FPL managers, but what sort of philosophy do you want to go with for the premiums? I think there are 2 ways to look at it. The first is, there's the school of thought of you just keep the premiums that you want to own, because working out when they're going to haul is very unpredictable. You just own them and you hope that they perform well and you just keep them longer term. So you sort of stick with your premiums, you don't switch around based on fixtures, and you just hope that those premiums are the best premiums over that long period of time. The other school of thought is that you switch them around based on fixtures. So when Palmer goes into his nice fixture run, you own him. Over this period where Saka had nice fixtures, you own him. Now maybe you look to switch from Saka to Heung-min Son or Foden, who have got a really nice fixture run. You then switch to an Ollie Watkins in 12 because he's got nice fixtures. You actually decide that, do you know what? Rather than using my transfers on cheap assets, I'm going to use my like £5.5 million midfielders. I'm actually going to keep those cheap assets fairly consistent, and I'm actually going to use my transfers on the premium assets. I don't necessarily massively fall into one school of thought more than the other, but I probably, and I think this is crazy for me because it's not normally the way that I would think, I probably am leaning more towards the school of thought of actually you just keep the premiums that you think are worth having. And the only reason I say that is, again, I do find it quite difficult to predict sometimes when these premiums will do especially well. So, for example, Haaland, Ipswich at home, you expected him to do well and he grabs a hat-trick. But equally, you might have expected him to do well against a Newcastle or a Fulham. I know he's not done well against Newcastle in the past, but Fulham at home felt like an okay fixture. He blanks. I feel like switching around some of these expensive assets, thinking that you know when they'll perform well, isn't always the best. Like, I know that Brighton game might have suited Palmer, and some people might have seen that. No one saw a 25-pointer against Brighton coming. If you were targeting the fixtures, you might not have necessarily owned him for that game. But then again, you look at it and think Saka hauled last week. If you just look at the fixtures, it's when you expected him to do well. So, I don't know, I'm going back and forth on it, but right now I own Haaland, Palmer, Saka, and I'm just thinking, I just don't really feel the need to switch them around at the moment. I think they're 3 brilliant assets, and Palmer and Saka do have really tricky fixtures over the next few. And if I'm targeting fixtures, Salah's fixtures aren't great over the next few, but they're probably slightly stronger going into a nice little fixture run. You've got Son, who has much better fixtures over the next 4 if we're looking from game week 8 to 11. Foden's got much better fixtures as well. So if I was of the school of thought of you switch them around based on fixtures, Saka to someone like Son or Foden for the next 4 weeks probably makes a lot of sense. But I don't want to do that because I think Saka is a better asset to own. So yeah, I probably am leaning towards the school of thought now that actually what I want to do with my team is pick the premiums that I think are the best to own and probably keep them slightly longer term and then use my transfers either rolling, in which case I can get to a point where when I decide to switch my premiums, I've got 3, 4, 5 transfers stacked up, or I use my transfers on trying to find those 5.5 to 6.5 million assets in the forward position and the midfield position that I think will perform really well given the fixtures. Because I think the returns are slightly more predictable for cheaper assets in the fixture runs that you would expect. I think with the premiums, because they are such brilliant players and they return so consistently, and because they have such high quality, I feel like trying to work out exactly when they're going to hold is a little bit more difficult. The only thing I would say about not targeting the fixtures as much as I've just spoken about, you still need to think about captaincy. And this is when I then go back in the other direction of, if I don't feel like I have the best captaincy option for a given week, I would probably be more willing to switch the premiums around. So when we go into a fixture run where Palmer's got a really nice set of fixtures and you think you might captain him, at that point, he is worth targeting given the fixtures because you're more likely to captain him. If I'm not as likely to captain Haaland, like again, if we switch over to FPL here, there is a run of fixtures where I'm like, I don't know that I captain Haaland in any of them. 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 even against Forest at home. Based on what we know, I'm not saying I wouldn't captain him, but I don't feel the need to. This period here, I think there are genuinely other captains that I would... Not every week they're definitely better, but I would at least consider. Like Cole Palmer himself, in game week, you could even, by the way, arguably captain him in 9 or 10, but 12 Leicester away, you could captain Salah, I think, has Southampton away, but then Villa at home's okay, Southampton away in 14's good. I could conceivably captain Cole Palmer in any of those. And then, like Saka in game week 12 onwards, West Ham away is an okay fixture if you wanted to. Fulham away is okay. Everton at home. And then even like Son over the next few. If Son's back and fully fit, there's justifiable... Like you could captain him in game week 11, for example. So captaincy is very important for me. It's why I don't want to go without Haaland for the next two, because he's got Wolves away and Southampton at home where he is the best captain. So this is such a rambly section. But I guess what I'm saying is I think you should pick, like, what do you want to do with your premiums? Do you want to switch them around? In which case, really what you need to be looking at is fixtures and matchups. Like, who do you think has really good matchups over the next few? Or do you just want to keep them longer term? In which case, you need to be thinking, right, who are the premiums that I think are the best to own? So in terms of who are the best premiums to own, Haaland obviously stands out for goal threat. He's clearly the best for goal threat. The only one that gets marginally close to him is actually Watkins, but he's still a bit of a way off. Then we've got a drop down all the way to Salah at 0.46 non-penalty expected goals per 90. So Haaland is absolutely clear-cut the best premium in terms of goal threat, even considering the fact that he's had 0 big chances in the last 2 weeks. However, if we're looking at in combination who has the best data, you can see that Saka's data is very, very close. Salah and Palmer's not much of a drop-off because they have such high assist threat. And actually, Saka's the one that stands out to me here because he still has decent goal threat at 0.31, but that assist threat is a joke. He's created 12 big chances in the league this season. He's just really, really, really creative at the moment. On top of the fact that we know he can score goals, we know he's on penalties as well. So I really like that. But yeah, Salah and Palmer as well, very consistent. Something that I like looking at a lot is big chance involvement per 90, which is big chances created plus big chances themselves. And as you can see here, there are 3 standout options. Palmer, Saka, and Watkins all have above 2 big chance involvements per 90. Palmer and Saka stand out for me because not only do they have high big chance involvements per 90, but they're also on penalties as well, which is another chance to have a big chance themselves. Watkins could still be on pens, by the way. We just don't think it's fairly likely, given that Tielemans has a good record, and also on top of that, he doesn't have a particularly good record himself. But yeah, when I look at that big chance involvement per 90, this is why I like Palmer and Saka. They've got goal threat, they've got assist threat, they're involved in so much of what their teams do. They take set pieces, they take penalties. Like, they've got everything. And something that I like about Saka maybe even more than Palmer is the amount of shots in the box per 90. Look at that, 3.16 shots in the box per 90. Palmer down at 1.96. Obviously, Haaland is a joke at 4.44. I think that when I look at this all together, Haaland is an extremely good FPL asset, even for his price. And in the weeks that you think Haaland is the best captaincy option, Haaland is a must-have for me in my FPL team. That's why I've got him for 8 and 9, because he's got Wolves and Southampton. I think he's the best captaincy option. When he's not the best captaincy option, Haaland is probably a sell, because he's so much money. You can't have a player that is not, for a long period of time, the best captaincy option. So I think Haaland is probably the one you are more happy selling and buying back, even if you've got money tied up, because you can't own a player that you're not fully comfortable captaining. So as of right now, Haaland's an own, but moving forward, he might not be. Then I just think that Palmer and Saka just stand out to me well ahead of the rest. I think Salah is very similar as an asset based on the data, the teams that they're playing for, to Palmer and Saka, but he's more expensive. So as of right now, if I'm saying you've got to have Haaland, or I think you should have Haaland for the next 2, I think Palmer and Saka are better value than Salah. which is why I picked Haaland, Palmer, Saka. You've got 3 players on penalties, Palmer and Saka on a lot of set pieces with good minutes. So Haaland, Palmer, Saka stand out. In weeks where Haaland isn't the standout captain, if Salah is, the transition is simply to move away from Haaland and into Salah. I don't think that you should have both Haaland and Salah. I think given their pricing, and given that they are more expensive than the likes of Palmer and Saka, I think if you're going to have Haaland and Salah in your team, it needs to be the fact that you think they are good captaincy options. And so I think, to just put that all together, because it's an incredibly rambly section, I think that having one of Haaland and Salah, plus 2 of Palmer, Saka, Son, Foden, Watkins, is the ideal structure moving forward. So I think you pick one of those big heavy hitters, and then you pair them with 2 of the other 5 assets listed here. Hopefully that makes sense. I would love to know which premiums you have right now, which premiums you plan on owning moving forward. But I think Palmer and Saka, for me, are basically permanent owns unless they pick up injuries. For now, I'm going to keep them in my team, and then I will switch that other spot between Haaland and Salah, depending on who I want to own at the time. So I just wanted to finish the video by talking about this Game Week 12 fixture swing, which people keep talking about. I briefly mentioned it on FPL Therapy this week as well. And if you've not yet seen the episode of FPL Therapy this week, after you've watched this, just search on Spotify, Apple, or YouTube FPL Therapy. It's my new podcast. Feel free to check it out if you want even more Raptor content, even though this video has been incredibly long already. But yeah, we've been speaking about it for a while. And what this basically means is between Game Week and 11 is a block of fixtures, I think. There's 4 fixtures. There are definitely teams that have really good fixtures over the next 4, such as Spurs. And then from 12 onwards, there is a pretty big fixture swing where a lot of teams that we don't necessarily own players from start to go into a really nice fixture run. And maybe teams that we are invested in don't have the best set of fixtures. There is also an international break between Game Week 11 and 12 too. So if you've still got your wildcard and you don't need it this week, I'd be looking at Game Week 12 as the best time to wildcard. And after that, you may be just saving it until like sort of Game Week 16, 17, 18. But definitely Game Week 12 look at. And so what I like to do when I know there's a fixture swing coming up in 4 or 5 weeks is almost, what I've done here is build a wildcard for Game Week 12. I obviously don't know what will happen in the next 4 weeks. If Son scores 4 hat-tricks in a row, I would have Son in my Game Week 12 wildcard, obviously. Or if, let's say, some of these players get injured or their team start to struggle, I might not. But I'm trying to anticipate what might be the team, the template, the structure, the players that we might start transitioning to in a few weeks. So this is roughly what I'm thinking at the moment for a Game Week 12 wildcard. And then if I have free transfers to use, let's say I pick up a defender injury. Let's say one of my defenders gets injured. Yes, I also want to target the next few weeks. But if I can bring in a player that not only targets the next few weeks, but also serves me from 12 onwards as well, I will absolutely do that. So if I go back to my Game Week 7 wildcard, on my Game Week 7 wildcard, I have Gabriel, Davis, Nuri, Saka, Mbeumo, Palmer, and Cunha. So only 7 of these, but players like Nuri, Cunha, and Davis, I knew that I was picking them not necessarily as much for the short term, but more for those decent long-term fixtures. So start to think about it a little bit. But the teams that I think will start to come into our thinking, Chelsea is the first one. They've not got a perfect set of fixtures by any means, but this is a really nice run for me. I really, really like this run here, especially Leicester and Southampton in 12 and 14. Then going on here, they've got a few decent, really nice home fixtures. I can imagine that Chelsea will come into our thinking. So I've got Sanchez. He's made the joint most saves in the league so far this season. And obviously Cole Palmer. So I think Chelsea will come into our thinking. Spurs don't have awful fixtures. They obviously have City in 12. So ideally you would not play Porro that week. But after that, I don't think this run is as bad as it first looks. So I'm certainly looking at maybe having 1 or 2 Spurs assets. And then Brighton is the other team. You can see I've got Dunk and João Pedro in here. From 12 onwards, I really like it. Bournemouth, Southampton, Fulham, Leicester, Palace, West Ham, Brentford. That is a really nice fixture run. That could be Welbeck. It could be that you go for a Matoma or a Minte. He's getting good minutes, but I really like the idea of having at least 2 Brighton. We spoke about Semenyo and Bournemouth as well from Game Week 12 onwards has a really nice set of fixtures. So if you own Semenyo and you can get away with not playing him in every week over this spell, or you just don't mind doing so, it might be worth trying to hold on to him. The other notable, I guess, actually, I'll just say Wolves have, again, really nice fixtures here. So I've got Nuri and Cunha. You wouldn't have to have both of them. Even Isak's got a nice fixture run. At the moment, not fit. And I know we disappointed a lot of us at the start of the year, but this is a really nice, decent set of fixtures as well. I could see him coming back into our thinking. But the real notable thing in this team is that I don't have Haaland and I've transitioned to a Salah draft. It just allows you to afford more expensive players, obviously, because you're saving 2.5 million or 2.7 million now at the moment, which is ridiculous. That's a lot of money. I still think Haaland will return quite well in this period here. Like, we're talking game week 12, Spurs, Liverpool, Forest, Palace, United, Villa. It's not a bad run, but if we think back to the defensive data, Spurs and Liverpool have been defending well, Forest have been defending well, Villa have been defending well, United and Palace are good fixtures. So these two here, you'd probably want to own him, but could you get away with not owning him for a few weeks here? You probably could. Now, Liverpool's fixtures aren't that much better, but I just think they are marginally better. Like, Southampton at home in 12 is great. City, they obviously then play against each other, but then Newcastle and Everton, I just think I would probably slightly prefer the fixtures for Salah plus the money. If they were the same price, I'd probably just pick Haaland, but you get an extra 2.7 to spend. So I do wonder if around game week 10 to 12, people might start transitioning back to a Salah draft away from a Haaland draft. I think there's the possibility to do that there. So yeah, just start to think ahead. If you take one thing from this video, this very long video, is just start to prepare for upcoming fixture swings. Don't think too far in the future, though. What I don't want you to do is neglect the next 4 weeks just in favour of having players that have good fixtures in the future, because then you're losing points now that you'll gain then. You need to have some kind of balance. So still target Spurs assets, really good for the next 4, but then also a little bit better long term. Even Ipswich, I'm not saying you necessarily want to go out there, but Leif Davis has good fixtures over the next few, but then also you're absolutely fine owning him for this little spell here as well. So are there players that you can bring in that not only serve you short term, but also serve you long term? Hopefully that's helpful. Hopefully that makes sense. And let me know if you've still got your wild card. Are you planning on playing it in game week 12? So guys, there we have it. A very, very long video to hopefully enjoy after the international break. And if you did enjoy today's video and you're still watching at this point, please do smash that like button. Make sure to subscribe as well. And as I said at the start of the video, make sure to check out Fantasy Football Hub. You can get 30% off at the moment and access to all of the stuff that I used in today's video. Until next time, which will be my team selection video tomorrow. Thank you very much for watching. Bye-bye.